I've always believed that faith, real faith, is something you live, not just something you say. But what I've noticed and what deeply unsettles me is this strange contradiction in modern Christianity. People wear the cross around their necks, post Bible verses on social media, go to church on Sundays, and then spend the rest of the week spreading hate, judging others, and doing the exact opposite of what Jesus preached. It's like there's a disconnect between believing in Jesus and actually following him. Let's just be honest. Hypocrisy is killing the credibility of Christianity. Are as capable, and I say that not as an outsider trying to tear it down, but as someone who deeply respects the message of Christ. What bothers me isn't Jesus. It's capable. It's the people who claim to follow him but live in ways he would have condemned. It's the preacher screaming about morality while cheating on his wife. It's the politician using Christianity as a shield while turning away refugees. It's the everyday person who claims to love their neighbor but mocks and marginalizes anyone who looks, thinks, or loves differently. And before anyone thinks I'm being too harsh, just take a step back and really look at behavior. Jesus healed the sick, dined with outcasts, forgave prostitutes, and loved the very people society discarded. He never once forced religion on anyone. He led with love, not condemnation. Yet today, some Christians act like they're on a moral throne, ready to judge, cancel, and divide. I look around and see people weaponizing scripture to justify hate. How did we get so far from the message? There's this phrase I keep hearing, not all Christians. And sure, that's true. I know plenty of people who live their faith with quiet integrity. They don't broadcast it. They embody it. They're the ones who show up, who listen, who love without conditions. But unfortunately, they're not the loudest voices. The loudest ones are usually the ones doing the most damage. Shouting from pulpits, comment sections, and news studios with this twisted version of Christianity that's more about control than compassion. And the damage, it's real. Young people are walking away from churches in record numbers, not because they hate God, not because they reject spirituality, but because they see the hypocrisy. They see leaders who preach purity and get caught in scandals. They see churches more concerned with politics than poverty. They see judgment instead of grace, and they're asking, rightfully, if this is what Christianity really is. Even more painful is watching how some Christians treat people who struggle, who sin, who doubt. Instead of embracing them like Jesus did, they push them away. They gossip, exclude, condemn. But aren't we all broken? Isn't that the entire point of grace? That no one is perfect, that we're all in need of mercy. I've even heard Christians say, well, I'm not perfect, just forgiven. And sure, that's technically true, but it's often used as a free pass to act however they want, without accountability. Forgiveness isn't a license to harm others and then hide behind God. It's a call to transformation, to live differently, to be better. And look, I'm not sitting here pretending I have it all figured out. I've made mistakes. I've wrestled with belief. I've been cynical, skeptical, even angry. But that's the thing, I own that. I don't pretend to be a moral authority. I'm just a human being trying to make sense of it all. But when I see people using the name of Jesus to push others down rather than lift them up, I can't stay silent. It's time to reclaim the core of Christianity, the real message, the radical love, the fierce compassion, the uncomfortable humility. Because if we stripped away all the noise, all the politics, all the hypocrisy, all the theatrics, and just focused on what Jesus actually said and did, I think a lot more people would be drawn in, not driven away. Imagine if Christians were known for being the most kind, the most honest, the most generous, the most welcoming people in society. Imagine if the church wasn't a place of fear, but a refuge, not a courtroom, but a hospital, not a stage for self-righteousness, but a sanctuary of grace. That kind of Christianity, I'd sign up for that. But until then, we've got to be real about the problem. Hypocrisy doesn't just hurt the image of the church. It hurts people. It creates wounds. It turns faith into a mask. And worst of all, it distorts the beautiful, revolutionary message of a man who loved the unlovable, touched the untouchable, and forgave the unforgivable. So when I speak out about this, it's not to mock or attack Christianity. It's to defend what I believe is still worth saving. The message is still beautiful, but it's been buried under ego, power, and fear. And if we're brave enough to call that out, to strip away the hypocrisy, we just might uncover something sacred again. It's not about being perfect. It's about being real, about striving, about aligning what we say with what we do. That's the kind of faith I respect. And that's the kind of Christianity the world desperately needs. I've been thinking a lot about the gap, no, the canyon, between what Jesus actually taught and how so many modern-day Christians behave. And I say this not as someone trying to attack faith, but as someone genuinely trying to understand how we've drifted so far from the original message. Because if you strip away all the politics, all the public performances, all the shouting matches on social media, what you're left with is a man who spoke of love, mercy, forgiveness, and humility. But that man, Jesus, seems to have been replaced by a version of Christianity that feels louder, colder, more self-righteous, and somehow less Christian. Jesus was radical in how he loved people. He touched lepers, forgave adulterers, dined with outcasts, and constantly lifted up the poor, the broken, the forgotten. He didn't seek power, he rejected it. He didn't align with the elites of his day. In fact, they were the ones most often on the receiving end of his criticism. And yet, when I look at how Christianity is represented today, especially in the media, it feels almost unrecognizable. There's this obsession now with being right, being morally superior, being on the correct side of every culture war, but Jesus wasn't obsessed with being right. He was obsessed with being kind. And the most staggering thing is, when you actually read the Gospels, Jesus reserved his harshest words not for sinners, but for the religious hypocrites, the ones who prayed in public for attention, who loaded others with shame while excusing themselves, who wore holiness like a costume, but lacked compassion at their core. That's what breaks my heart. Somewhere along the line, the message of Jesus got hijacked. It became less about the internal transformation of the heart and more about external control, what you wear, how you vote, who you love, and who you're allowed to be. The church became a gatekeeper instead of a gateway, a place where people feel judged before they ever feel seen. And don't get me wrong, there are still churches doing beautiful, humble, quiet work in the world. There are still believers who live out their faith in a way that's selfless and pure. I know them. I've met them. They don't shout. They serve. They don't condemn. They embrace. They don't just talk about love. They live it, even when no one's watching. But unfortunately, they're not the ones grabbing headlines. The ones we see the most are usually the ones shouting the loudest about who's wrong, who's going to hell, and who doesn't belong. And somewhere in that noise, the actual voice of Jesus gets drowned out. I've always found it fascinating how simple Jesus made it. When asked what the greatest commandment was, he didn't say, follow all 613 laws perfectly. He said, love God and love your neighbor. That's it. And yet, in our time, that simplicity has been buried under layers of dogma, politics, and performance. It's even become fashionable in some circles to weaponize Christianity, to use the name of Jesus to justify exclusion, judgment, or even cruelty. But when I look at Jesus, I see someone who wept over the suffering of others, who stood in front of the condemned and defended them, who broke the rules of his own society to restore dignity to the people the system had abandoned. Jesus never forced anyone to follow him. He didn't lead with threats. He led with invitation. He didn't build walls. He broke them down. So when I see Christians today building walls between themselves and others, especially the vulnerable, the marginalized, the misunderstood, I can't help but ask, what Jesus are you following? Because it doesn't look like the one I read about. It doesn't sound like the one who washed feet instead of demanding loyalty. It doesn't feel like the one who said, let the one who is without sin cast the first stone. What I think we're seeing is a form of Christianity that has become more about identity than about transformation. It's a badge now, a label people wear, but the fruit isn't there. And what did Jesus say? You will know them by their fruit, not by their church attendance, not by their hashtags, not by how loud they pray in public, but by the way they live, by how they treat the least of these, by how they love when no one's looking. That's the challenge for anyone who calls themselves a Christian. Not just to believe, but to follow, to live it, to embody it, even when it's inconvenient, especially when it's uncomfortable, because real love costs something. Grace isn't cheap. Mercy takes effort, and humility. That's the hardest part, but it's the part that looks the most like Christ. I think people are hungry for authenticity. They're tired of fake smiles and empty sermons. They want something real, something that can actually hold them when life falls apart. And the tragic thing is, the real Jesus offers that. But he's been buried under all this noise, under ego, fear, tribalism, and tradition. So maybe the question isn't whether people are rejecting Christianity. Maybe they're rejecting a version of it that no longer resembles Christ. That's not an attack, it's an invitation to return, to reflect, to ask, are we following Jesus or just using his name to follow ourselves? Because if modern Christians started to live more like Christ, if we loved relentlessly, gave generously, forgave radically, served quietly, I truly believe the world would take notice. Not because of our words, but because of our witness. That's the kind of faith the world doesn't just need. It's the kind of faith it's waiting for. I've been asking myself a question that I think a lot of people are quietly wrestling with, and is Christianity still relevant today? Not just in theory or tradition, but in the real messy, complicated world we actually live in. We're living in a time of constant change, technology, culture, politics, everything's shifting fast. And in that whirlwind, people are searching for something real, something stable, something deeper than the next trend or hot take. So, is Christianity part of that answer? Or has it become just another old structure collecting dust? For me, the answer isn't black and white, it's layered. Because if we're talking about the message of Christianity, the actual teachings of Jesus, then yes, it's more relevant than ever. Love your neighbor, turn the other cheek, care for the poor, forgive even when it's hard. These aren't outdated ideas. If anything, they're revolutionary in a world built on revenge, greed, and division. They cut straight through the noise. They challenge power. They comfort the broken. They call us to something higher than just survival or self-interest. But here's the problem. What's preached on Sunday often doesn't show up on Monday. And that disconnect makes people skeptical. I get it. We've all seen churches more obsessed with power than with people. We've seen Christian leaders fall hard, not just in private sin, but in public arrogance. We've seen faith used as a weapon instead of a healing force. And when that happens over and over, people start to wonder if the whole thing's a scam. I don't blame them. And yet, I can't shake the sense that there's something in the heart of Christianity that still speaks to the deepest part of us. A longing for grace when we mess up, a thirst for truth in a world drowning in spin, a need for connection that goes beyond the transactional. Strip away the politics, the culture wars, the hypocrisy, and what's left is a man who said, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." That hits. Because aren't we all tired? Aren't we all carrying something? People don't need religion to feel guilty. They already do. What they need is hope. Real hope. Not in some vague motivational sense, but hope that there's a purpose, that their life matters, that love is stronger than loss, that there's more than just what we see. And Christianity, at its core, offers that. Not because it promises an easy life, but because it promises that no matter what, we're not alone. What makes Christianity still matter isn't the institutions or the rituals. It's the person of Jesus. He didn't avoid the mess. He stepped into it. He wasn't a celebrity, he was a servant. He didn't conquer with violence. He conquered with sacrifice. Even people who don't believe in him often admire him. Why? Because his life pushes against everything our world rewards: fame, wealth, dominance. He rejected all of it. And yet, his influence has lasted longer than any empire. The problem is, we've often buried that message under centuries of tradition, rules, and fear. We've made it about control when it should be about freedom. We've made it about judgment when it should be about grace. And then we wonder why people are walking away. But I don't think they're walking away from Jesus. I think they're walking away from the noise. Look at the world right now. People are anxious, disconnected, searching. Mental health is collapsing. Families are breaking. Loneliness is at an all-time high. We're more connected digitally, but more divided emotionally. And in that chaos, the question isn't, is Christianity trendy? It's, does it still have something to say? I believe it does. But only if we return to the raw, radical heart of it. Christianity isn't supposed to be safe. It's supposed to be a challenge. It's supposed to flip our values upside down. It's not about being comfortable. It's about being transformed, and that's what makes it so powerful. It's not a self-help routine. It's not a political identity. It's a daily, sometimes painful invitation to become more like Christ, to love when it hurts, to forgive when it feels impossible, to live for something bigger than yourself. And that's why I still believe it's relevant. Not because it makes life easier, but because it makes life deeper. It gives suffering a purpose. It gives brokenness a path to healing. It reminds us that we are not the center of the universe. And thank God for that. Because if all we have is us, then what hope do we really have? I'm not here to convert anyone. I'm not here to win an argument. I'm just speaking honestly from the tension I feel. I've questioned, I've doubted, I've been angry, I've walked away and come back. And what I've found over and over again is that beneath all the disappointment, beneath the scandals and the silence and the politics, Jesus is still there, still inviting, still waiting, still relevant. Maybe the question isn't, is Christianity still relevant? Maybe the real question is, have we forgotten how radical it really is? Because if we actually lived like Jesus told us to, I think the world would notice. Not because we're louder, but because we're different, kender, braver, freer. And maybe then people wouldn't just hear about Christianity that feel it. That's what the world needs. Not louder Christians, truer ones. Not perfect people, real ones. That's the kind of faith that never goes out of style. I've been critical of Christianity before, openly, even sharply at times. Not because I hate it, but because I expect more from it. But if there's one thing I want to make crystal clear, it's this: I have deep respect for true believers. Not the ones who just wear the label, but the ones who live the life, the ones who don't need to tell you they're Christian. You can see it in how they treat people. Those are the ones I admire. Those are the ones who make the message real. And I'm not talking about the spotlight seekers or the ones chasing influence in the name of religion. I'm talking about the quiet ones, the ones who are generous when no one's watching, the ones who sit with you in silence when you're broken, the ones who actually embody the message of Jesus instead of just quoting it to win debates. They don't try to dominate the room. They bring peace to it. We all know there's a difference between claiming a faith and living it. And what I've found over the years is that the most powerful Christians aren't the loudest. They're the most consistent, as capable. They're not out there trying to impress you with their theology. They're too busy feeding the hungry, visiting the sick, forgiving the unforgivable, and loving the people society has forgotten. That's the kind of Christianity that still gives me hope. I've met these people. I've watched them show up for others again and again without expecting anything in return. They don't preach from a pedestal. They walk beside you. And it's humbling, honestly, because while so many use religion as a badge or a weapon, these people carry it like a quiet fire inside them. It's not about being right for them. It's about being righteous in the way they live, not in the way they argue. And you know what else stands out? The humility. True believers don't pretend to be perfect. They admit when they fail. They apologize, they own their mistakes. That takes courage. It's easy to play the moral authority. It's much harder to say, I got it wrong. But that's where the power is, in the honesty, in the vulnerability, in the refusal to hide behind a religious mask. We're in a time now where authenticity is rare. Everyone's performing. Everyone's curating their image. But true believers don't need to perform because their lives already speak. You can feel it when you're around them. They don't make you feel judged. They make you feel safe. They don't shame you into changing. They love you into healing. And let me tell you, when you're hurting, that kind of love hits different. When you've lost hope, when you've messed up, when you feel like you don't belong anywhere, a true believer is the kind of person who pulls up a chair and says, you're still worthy. They don't ask you to clean up your act before they show compassion. They love first, unconditionally. That's what Jesus did. And that's why these people carry so much quiet strength. I don't care what denomination you belong to. I don't care how many Bible verses you can recite. If your faith doesn't lead you to love people, then what's the point? But when it does, when it drives you to serve, to listen, to protect, to forgive, then that's something worth respecting. That's not just religion. That's transformation. That's power. What's sad is that these people, the true believers, often get overshadowed by the ones who talk the most and do the least. The ones who are quick to judge and slow to understand, and it gives Christianity a bad name. But if you look past the noise, if you really pay attention, you'll find people out there living this faith in a way that's breathtakingly beautiful. They're the reason I haven't completely given up on the church. They're the reason I believe the message of Christ still matters. They don't show up to be heroes. They show up because it's the right thing to do. They take in the foster child. They forgive the addict. They love the person everyone else has written off. And they do it not for credit, not for applause, but because they believe that's what love requires. That's what God requires. That's what being a true believer looks like. And here's the thing. It's not easy. Real faith costs something. It costs time. It costs comfort. It costs ego. But that's what makes it powerful. Anyone can post a Bible quote. But to live that quote when it's hard, when it hurts, when it's inconvenient, that's rare. And that's what earns my respect. So yeah, I'll keep calling out hypocrisy when I see it. I'll keep challenging people to live what they preach. But at the same time, I'll keep honoring the ones who actually do, the ones who don't need a stage, just a purpose, the ones who prove their faith not with words, but with presence. You know the type. They walk into a room and everything just feels lighter. You feel seen. You feel heard. That's no accident. That's the gospel in motion. If more Christians lived like that, if more of us followed that path, I think the world would stop tuning out. Because the truth is, people aren't rejecting Jesus. They're rejecting the versions of him that don't look like him at all. But the true believers, they remind us what he really looks like. They remind us why the message still matters. And they remind me why, despite all the noise and all the mess, I still believe there's something in this worth holding on to.